Hello everybody, my name is Kara, and today I'm here with a spoiler-free review for The Magnolia Sword, A Ballad of Mulan by Sherry Thomas. So as I said, this entire review is going to be spoiler-free, so you can decide if this sounds like something you might like to pick up. And just to get this out of the way now, I absolutely love this book. This is probably one of my favorite books of the year, and it has definitely been the biggest surprise of this year, because I really had no idea what to expect from this, aside from a Mulan retelling. I don't think anybody talked about this book. This was a release that came out in 2019, and it was on my radar. I was interested in it, but it had kind of like dropped off my immediate attention. Like I hadn't heard any glowing reviews, I hadn't heard any reviews at all, so I didn't get around to it until this year, and I actually read a copy from my library. I loved it so much that I pretty much immediately ordered a copy for myself. So The Magnolia Sword is an own voices retelling of the Ballad of Mulan that draws on the original legend of Mulan in addition to 5th century Chinese history, and also blends it with some influences from wuxia, I think that's how you say that. If not, I will correct myself on screen, which is a particular genre of martial arts dramas that Sherry Thomas worked into the story as well. So the premise of this book is that our main character Mulan, her family for many generations has kind of been set up in opposition to this other family, and once every generation, one person from each family meets to have a sword battle or duel. And over time this has kind of degenerated into a vendetta rather than a practicing sword fighting kind of thing. So Mulan is the latest in her family to be trained, and so a lot of her life has been defined by this one sword fight that she has been preparing for. And then right at the beginning of the book, a draft goes into effect where one male from each family is drafted into the Imperial Army. And because of her father's health, he is unable to go, and she wants to protect him, so she disguises herself as a boy and enlists in her father's place. And Mulan is a very brave person, but she doesn't necessarily want to die fighting for her country for a war that she doesn't even really understand. So when she gets the opportunity to be placed with the Imperial Prince, I believe they refer to him as the Princeling because that is the closest translation of the Chinese word that they use. When she gets the opportunity to be placed with his group, she thinks that will keep her out of the fighting, so she does that. And then it starts becoming clear that there are some other things going on with this war, that there are some politics that are happening behind the scenes, and Mulan has to decide if she's going to get more involved than she wanted to be, because it looks like the entire future of their country is at stake, and Mulan and a few of the other characters might be the only ones who can do something about saving it. And like I said, this book was just such a wonderful surprise because not only had I heard nothing about it prior to this, but the first chapter, like the opening chapter, is very different in tone from the rest of the book, and I think it kind of gave me some expectations about how the story would go, because we open up the book with a sort of training meeting between Mulan and the son of the other family who she is supposed to fight, because they've had several of these training meetings up to this point. And it's not that it was badly written or anything, but just kind of the style of that scene, like the events that happened and the way it was written, it kind of made me think, okay, so there's going to be this forbidden romance that's going to develop probably pretty quickly. A lot of this book is going to be defined by this sword fight, and it kind of made it seem like the other character, like the possible love interest, would be kind of this generic or basic love interest character. And none of that was true. And after reading the rest of the book, I actually think the opening scene makes a lot of sense, but it was just kind of funny that the assumptions I made from that scene were completely incorrect, and much to my delight, because the story and the characters and the plot ended up being so much more complex than I might have assumed from that setup. So the first thing I want to mention is the sword fighting aspect of the plot. Like I said, that was kind of one of the mistaken assumptions I made from that opening scene, is that that would kind of be the main focus of the story. And it was definitely very important. I don't want it to sound like it doesn't matter in the story, because it does, but it more ended up being a reason to get these characters set up in relation to each other, and also a reason to provide them with these skills that they would need later on. And then also on the plot, this is a pretty slow book in some ways, which I didn't mind because I am definitely a character-focused reader, and these characters were just wonderfully developed, so I was pretty much along for the ride no matter what they were doing or what was going on. I could see some readers finding it too slow, kind of boring even, but I absolutely loved it. I think the measured pace really gave you the opportunity to get to know and love these characters, especially our two leads, Mulan and the other character who I won't actually name in this review. He's the Princeling, because you don't actually find out his name until much later on in the book, and I don't want to ruin that moment. But the slow pace really helps you get to know and love these characters and the surrounding characters as well. And I think it also enables you to really sink into this rich world building. Some other notes on the plot, there were some parts that I actually found very unexpected, which was really fun, and the parts that I found predictable were predictable in a good way, in the sense that we spent so much time building up these little details that by the time they came to their conclusion, I found it satisfying, so I didn't want it to be a twist, if that makes sense. Also, I think the way that the cross-dressing plot was handled was really, really well done. That's another thing that I was kind of worried would not take over the story, because it is significant, but I kind of assumed that that would be Mulan's primary focus, is the fact that she's really hoping that the other characters don't find out that she's actually a woman. And that does matter to her, but she also has her priorities in order, because when they start getting caught up in these like massive political machinations and all of these really dangerous situations, she realizes like, okay, in the scheme of things, like, yes, I'm worried about what could happen to me if they find out I'm a woman, but I also have other things going on that I'm going to worry about instead of that. And I just really appreciated that. And then along with that, we have open acknowledgement of gay characters. There are actually several side characters in this book who are gay, and I think especially in the context of the story, that was really nice, because sometimes I read books that have women dressing up as men, like that cross-dressing subplot, and the other characters see what look like two men interacting and having certain connotations to their interactions, and their reaction is pretty much like, wow, that's interesting. Wonder what could be going on. And it, like, the way they react to it is almost like none of these people in this book have ever heard of gay people, like, existing, and that did not happen in this book. Like, people actually, like, see Mulan and the princeling interacting, and they're like, oh, maybe they like boys. And it's just, like, that seems like such a little thing, but that's something we very rarely get in these cross-dressing types of books, so I really, really liked seeing that. And then also, I mentioned that the stakes of this book were really high, and I really liked that. Like, again, Mulan has that worry about being found out, if people are starting to suspect her and what could happen to her if they find out that she is a girl, but that's not her biggest concern. And when she starts developing romantic feelings for somebody, like, yes, it's important to her, but she's also like, I'm a little worried about my whole country right now, not the time for romance. And I just, like, really appreciated that. Like, she's got a good head on her shoulders, she's practical, she definitely has, like, emotions and everything, but she knows that certain things need more attention than others, and, like, when compared to the fate of her whole country, she's like, I can worry about my boy troubles later. And then I mentioned the world building earlier as an aspect that I really loved. The way the majority of the world building or the backstory of this world was given to you, and especially, like, specific cultural elements, we would kind of get, like, small, very small chunks of, like, direct information that were given to us through Mulan's narration. And I could see, this is another element where I could see that not working for everybody, but it never felt like info dumping. It felt like a very reasonable way to get us acquainted with this different culture and these different laws and this different background that Mulan had grown up with. It didn't ever feel awkward or stilted. I also really loved the balance of the large and the small scale of this world and of this story. Like, we have these, like, massive political things that are happening, but this is also a story about individual people and individual choices, and I really, really liked that. And I also really liked the way that the cultural aspects of this book actively influenced these characters' lives and the way they saw the world and interacted with each other. There's this really great section where Mulan is, like, basically just having this internal struggle about the way that she has been raised. So being this incredibly skilled swordswoman and having these amazing abilities, she's been raised in a way that's very different from the way that traditionally women would be brought up. So she has that part of her life, but she also has this culture of rules and restrictions placed on women that she has grown up being surrounded by. So those things have still affected her. So she has these kind of opposing forces of her upbringing that are pulling at her. And then she also has her own personality and her own choices and her own wishes. And I just think that whole scene was just so beautifully constructed, because it was one of the best examples I've ever seen of the way that a character, like a well-written character, their circumstances affect them and they matter to them in the story, but they also have a strong enough personality and character that it's not completely determined by the way they grew up. And then, as I mentioned, one of my favorite aspects of this book was the characters, and especially the main characters. Like Mulan as a protagonist, I just loved her so much. She was this amazing balance of not opposing characteristics exactly, but, like, believable conflict that we see in people that we know in real life. Like I mentioned, that she's very brave, but she's also practical. She doesn't want to die for a war that she doesn't understand. Like, she promised her family she would come back, and she wants to come back. So she has that conflict between bravery and wanting to do the right thing, and then also wanting to protect herself. She's also so funny and so smart, and she admits when she's wrong about things. And I just, like, I love how competent she is. She does make mistakes, or she does have stumbling blocks when it comes to, like, using her abilities in a different context, but the conflict of this book is not from her not knowing what she's doing. It was just so refreshing to see a main character, especially a female main character, who is unapologetically good at what she does. Like, I just adored that so, so much. And another thing that I loved about this book is that despite the fact that for a good portion of the book, Mulan is the only female character that we spend a substantial amount of time with, this book is still inherently feminist. Like, despite the fact that there's not that many women in the book because of the setting and everything, it makes sense. The perspective this book has and that the female characters have on women is so much better than, like, supposedly feminist books I have read before. Like, Mulan has all of these amazing qualities. You know, she's brave, she's talented, she's smart, like, the list goes on. And there are explicit references made by Mulan to, like, in her own narration or, like, by the book itself, about how that doesn't mean that she's not like other girls. Like, these things mean that she is like other girls, because girls can be wonderful. Girls are talented and smart. Like, it just makes me so happy that we have a female character who's living in this men's world, and that is not used as an excuse to tear other women down. Like, Mulan makes the point that any woman could do what she is doing, and that doesn't make it less impressive. Like, she doesn't have to downplay the value of other girls in order to appreciate what she is capable of doing. I also really loved the Princelings character. Again, I'm not going to talk about his name because you don't actually learn it for a while, but he is also just so smart and so competent, and like with Mulan, like, he has obstacles that he has to overcome with his own abilities or his own like goals or what he's trying to do. But the problems of this book are not caused by him and Mulan making stupid choices. And that's the kind of conflict I like to read about. Like, I want my main characters to be flawed, but I don't want the entire problem in the book to have been solved if they had just made a reasonable decision, if that distinction makes sense. I don't want to say too much about the development of his character, because one of the exciting things about it was that he was so different from my perception of him, which is kind of the experience Mulan had with him too, is like, she made all these assumptions based on their initial interactions, and then realized that he was so much more than that. So I'm not going to go into his character too much, but just know that he is probably one of my favorite love interests I have read in a while. I just love his and Mulan's relationship. It's so subtly built up. They're so thoughtful and caring with each other. They inspire each other to do better while also being strong enough on their own. I just love the way that their relationship developed, from kind of getting off on the wrong foot to this like grudging respect for each other, to becoming allies and friends, and then to possibly something more. It was just so beautifully developed, and it never took over the story. Like I mentioned earlier, like Mulan and also the prince, like, they have priorities. Like, they know that even if they really want to be together or they want to spend time with each other, they know that they have other things going on. And finally, the last aspect of this book I'm going to talk about is the themes. I just really, really loved how beautifully those were developed and how subtle they were throughout the story. Even though there was a clear focus on some of these themes, I never felt like it was like beating you over the head with them, or like the thematic elements were like taking over the plot or the characters or anything. Like, it felt like a very important part of this book while also being balanced with the other parts of the story. Like, I love this idea, like, I love the way that bravery was explored in this book, and the idea that bravery is not making one decision. It's not like if you make one mistake, you're a coward forever, you know, like, it's an ongoing battle, and that's a good thing and also a bad thing. I also loved the commentary on imperialism and discrimination. Like, Mulan ends up spending a lot of time with people from other ethnic groups that she hadn't really interacted with before, and she's forced to confront the prejudices that she didn't realize that she had, and also to realize one of the other really important themes of this book is that history is always written from a certain point of view. You know, like, we hear, you know, history is written by the victors, which is definitely true. And also just this idea that there's not really any neutral history. Like, even the fact that one group already had a written language and one group doesn't, that's going to so deeply affect the kind of history that is passed down about those groups. And I just found that so interesting, and the way that Mulan is forced to confront her own mistaken beliefs about that was so interesting and so well done. And I love the fact that she has this moment of realization where, like, after making friends with people from these groups that she didn't realize she kind of had prejudices about, she realizes, like, it shouldn't have taken her being friends with somebody to realize that the way they were talking about these people was wrong. So I just really love that that was directly addressed in the story. And like I mentioned earlier, I love this book's like feminist message, because despite the fact that there are not many female characters in this book, the ones that are in this book are just so wonderfully complex and so well developed, and they're not treated as the exception. So as you can probably tell, I just fell in love with this book. Basically every aspect of this book just really, really worked for me. I can see why it wouldn't work for everybody. Like I mentioned, the slow pace not being for everyone, and like the political plot and everything might also not appeal to everybody. But I also want to mention that the like military and political machinations, like the military maneuvering especially, I did not expect to like that, because that's something I tend to find very boring in books. And also there was quite a bit of traveling in this book, which is another thing that I tend to hate. So the fact that those two things were so prominent in this book and I still loved it so much, I think speaks pretty highly in its favor, and it might indicate that even if some aspects of this book don't seem like your favorite thing, you might still enjoy it anyway if the other aspects appeal to you, because that definitely happened with me with the journey aspects and the military aspects. So as is probably obvious, I ended up giving the Magnolia Sword 5 stars. I absolutely loved this book. I really hope more people read it, or try it at least, because I'm really sad that it's gotten so little attention. Maybe they were having a hard time marketing it, because it's a little hard to decide if it's a historical fiction or a fantasy book, because even though majority of it feels like historical fiction, the premise sounds a little bit more like fantasy, which is actually in line with the genre that Sherry Thomas was adapting. Is the wuxia genre is very much based in real life. It's very grounded, except for the kind of supernaturally gifted swordsman. So I wonder if that's maybe one of the reasons that it's been a little hard to market this book, is it's like, is it historical fiction? Is it fantasy? Like, it's a Mulan retelling, but it still doesn't really fit into either of those categories. So please let me know if you guys have read The Magnolia Sword, or if you're going to pick it up. I hope you do, if it sounds at all interesting to you. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!